We are celebrating a 2-year project that we are just about 1 year through, and so we're going to do a midterm report on that. And in the process, you're going to learn a lot about our church, but you're going to learn something very unique and wonderful about Jesus today, and hopefully at the end, I'm going to tie them both together. Does that sound like fun? So here we go. We're going to go on that adventure, and so when you walked in, you saw a big banner that said, "Thank you for engaging," because the project that we started a year ago was called Engage. Oh, by the way, if you didn't get to do so on the way in, you get to do one of those wonderful, holy, be like Jesus things on the way out and eat a piece of cake. How about that? I'm not sure that Jesus had cake, but if he lived today, I know he would. So there you go. So we're going to do that on the way out to celebrate. This is in the middle of a teaching series we call This Is Us. And in this series, we are looking at 4 things that have always shaped our church. There are 4 things that are very near and dear to the heart of God, and if he gives us the grace and the ability, as long as our church stands, these 4 words will be hallmarks of our church. And so today, we're going to celebrate Engage in the context of that. Now, for the last year, we have been saying we're using these 2 years, 2018 and 2019, to actually set up the next 20 years in our church and all the things that God is calling us to do. And that's been a really interesting journey. What all did that include? We said, well, first of all, we need to fund the ongoing operations. That's a good idea, right? Pull the plug on that, we got no church. So we're going to fund the ongoing operations. We're going to reduce our debt. And as we do that, that will give us the space and room to improve our methods, which will include retooling our staff and adapting our campus so that we can use it better. And so this began a year ago, and those of us who were in the church at the time committed ourselves to $3.6 million over the coming 2 years. We're about halfway through that right now. That's a big time commitment, don't you think? So here's where we are so far. In reducing our debt, 2 months ago, we renegotiated, we refinanced our church. We paid off $1.15 million of our debt. How about that? That's a very big thing. And the end result of that, we got a lower interest rate. And the end result of that is a savings of about $7,000 a month, which will help us fund some other things. So here's what we have done in improving our methods. We have enlisted the partnership of a number of consultants, some of them people, some of them organizations, but there are people and organizations who have a proven track record of really helping grow the church in healthy ways. And so last Sunday you heard about one of the organizations that we have enlisted as a consultant and partner, and that is Young Life. And if you were here last Sunday, you got to meet Bobby and Lauren, and that's a very exciting thing. Some of you have heard of North Point. That's another consultant that we're using. And every consultant that we use, we take the best of what they have. We sit down with our leadership team. We figure out how it needs to be tweaked, what parts of it we can use here, what parts of it we can't use, and then we figure out how to move forward. So we've done that. We launched community groups back in October. 30 groups, 350 adults. Clap nice and loud if you're in one of those groups. Awesome. Yes, we are learning and growing. We are launching next-gen strategies in our church. We used to call it children's ministry, but we have a whole new strategy that God is leading us to that I think is going to light up your kids and your grandkids. And if you don't have any kids and you don't have any grandkids, it's going to light up the kids you love. And if you don't love kids, you come and see me afterwards. You need some help. Fair enough? All right? So we're launching next-gen strategies, and part of that is our partnership with Young Life, which you heard about last week. So right now, we're going to do some celebrating, and I'm going to embarrass some of you. Not because I love to embarrass you, but most people don't like to stand up in church. But I'm going to give you the opportunity. I'm going to actually ask you to stand up in church. So before I do that, I want to acknowledge it. I want to apologize for it up front, and I want to ask for your cooperation. Are you on board with that? So here's the deal. If you made a financial commitment to engage, there's about 121 families in our church who made financial commitments to engage, and you have been giving for the last year. By the way, if you have come to our church and you have started giving to our church, you didn't know it, but you were giving to engage. So if you have a commitment or you've been giving to our church, I'm going to ask you to stand, not right now, but in a minute. If you're involved in community group leadership, there are 46 people in our church who are either on the mentoring team, they are a community group leader, or they're an assistant community group leader. You know who you are. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to stand. If you're part of implementing the next gen strategies, some of you have heard it referred to as Orange. It's actually next gen strategies in our church. There's about 75 people involved in that. And if you are working to launch Young Life in our town and inside our church, there's a number of volunteers working on that already. If you fit any of those categories, would you please stand right now? Please. And please remain standing. I have something I want to say to you, okay? I want to say to you, thank you for having the faith to invest. Thank you for having the faith to believe not just in this church, but in the kingdom of Jesus enough to say, I'm willing to work for it, I'm willing to give to it, I'm willing to buy in, I'm willing to be part of what Jesus is doing. And so I really want to thank you. Now, I would like for all of the rest of you who are seated to please stand. And here's what I want to say to all of us. We are a church. We all have opportunities to engage, and I have a feeling that somewhere in 2019, we're all going to get engaged. We are all going to be involved in this process somewhere, somehow, and I want us to just to acknowledge that and to applaud in faith that God is going to do something great through us in 2019. Would you do that, please? Thank you. Now you can sit down. So, that's about engage, and please eat a piece of cake on the way out, all right? I don't want to be eating that cake tomorrow in staff meeting, all right? So, and be grateful for what God's doing. So, let's take a look at what engage is going to look like in this coming year. These are things you're going to see. We're going to do a next gen reveal on February the 10th for all the volunteers that currently work with our youth and children. Because they're really bought in and they are heavily vested, we're actually going to unfold those strategies to that group of people first. And then on the 24th, we're going to do a community update meeting that we invite everyone in our church to come to if you want to, and you can learn about the next gen strategies at that meeting on the 24th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to be taking whole teams of people to various research and learning events and training events. We're going to be inviting consultants to come and work with our people here. We're going to be taking whole groups of people to different trainings and different seminars and visiting different church campuses. And we're going to learn from just about everybody that we can learn from, because the next year is going to be a defining season in our church. We're going to be expanding our staff, including looking for, locating, and hiring a new lead pastor. Are you excited about that? Your enthusiasm overwhelms me. But I will tell you this, it was better than first service. It was like 3 people that applauded, all right? I want you to get excited about it. We are going to find a new lead pastor for our church. Now you can applaud that. We're going to expand other staff members as well as we locate them and God enables that. That's going to be a great thing for our church. And we're going to begin adapting our campus. So yes, you're going to come here some Sundays and it's going to be a pardon our dust kind of Sunday. And we'll be taking out some walls and we'll be creating hallways and we're going to be creating some new meeting spaces and just throughout the whole year and probably over into to 2020, we will be adapting our campus and it will just continue to morph so that we can use it better. So with all of that in mind, I have one thing that I would love to say to all of us, and that is this: let's just stay engaged. 2 Sundays ago, I laid out for our church, I postured a question: what if the purpose of the church wasn't to make people religious? And what if the purpose of the church wasn't to make people more spiritual? And what if the purpose of the church wasn't to correct people's behavior? What if the purpose of the church was to help people encounter and engage with Jesus? That's our job. And so let's just stay engaged. And if you're not involved in a community group, I want to give you the opportunity. We will be later this year. You can get involved in a community group, a small group of adults that actually work on growing our faith together. If you're not involved in next-gen strategies or guest services or some other thing that our church does, and you really want to take the next step, you're going to have multiple opportunities in this coming year to, in various different formats, buy into what Jesus is doing in this community and the surrounding communities and a handful of places around the world, what Jesus is doing through our church. And that's a great thing. So now that thing I wanted to teach you about Jesus and that thing I wanted to teach you about our church. This sort of innovation, the things that we've just been talking about, this willingness to change, this attempting new and great things for God is actually in our DNA, our church's DNA, because it's in the DNA of our leader, Jesus. I want to make a statement. It is a factual statement that I'm going to give you evidence for later. And it may shock you, but it's actually a true statement, and here it is. Jesus was the most innovative, creative, outside-the-box leader this world has ever known. Do you realize that? He is and was the most innovative, creative, outside-the-box leader the world has ever known. And one of the reasons we know that is because when he lived on our earth, people asked him some really interesting questions because he was so far outside the box of what normal religious leaders did, people had a hard time grasping how he could actually be a religious leader. Take a look at some of the questions that people ask him. They ask his followers, "Why does your teacher eat with what? Such scum?" I'm pretty sure that was not complimentary or intended to be that way, but no other religious leader was out there eating with people who were notorious sinners. They ask him this question: "Why don't your followers fast like we and the Pharisees do?" Fasting means just going without food. And the Pharisees used to fast every Thursday. And believe it or not, they had makeup that they wore that would make their faces look sad. It was made out of charcoal and ash. Isn't that weird? And they looked at Jesus and said, "Hey, why aren't you on board with all the religious rites and all the ceremonies and all the rituals that all the rest of the religious leaders are all slaves to? Why don't you do that stuff?" They said this: "Why do you use parables when you talk with the people? Why don't you just quote a bunch of Old Testament Bible scriptures and get into the theology of all the prophecies and all the stuff that's over there? Why do you talk to people in ways that don't seem very religious or theological?" They ask him, "Why do your followers disobey age-old traditions?" Wow. We're going to dig into that. It's so interesting. Jesus, "Hey, buddy, you realize what you're doing? You're changing. You're upsetting the whole religious aristocracy. You're upsetting religious history. All these age-old traditions that every religious leader in our country and in our culture has ever had. all the songs that they have always sung, all the rites and rituals that they have always done. Jesus, what's up with you? You're changing everything. And one of my favorites, one day Jesus was on top of the Mount of Olives, which is a hill a little bit shorter than Sonoma Mountain, actually quite a bit shorter. And it was quite a bit closer to Jerusalem than Sonoma Mountain is to Petaluma. If you can imagine a large hill, maybe a quarter of the distance to Sonoma Mountain from here. And he was on top of the Mount of Olives, and there was a large crowd of people, and they began to celebrate the great things that Jesus was doing among them. And somebody got the wild idea, let's throw our coats down on the pavement, and Hollywood borrowed that years later, and they rolled out the red carpet. But I just want you to know they got that from Jesus, all right? And so they were throwing their coats down, they were cutting branches off palm trees, because they knew that kings had people fan them, and they saw Jesus as their king. So they were fanning him and rolling out the red carpet for him. And Jesus went down the road that goes down the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley, up a short little incline to the eastern wall of Jerusalem, and he rode through the eastern gate of Jerusalem, which was right next to the temple, and he went around the corner to the temple, and that's where we're going to pick up the story. And the Bible says that the blind and the lame came to Jesus in the temple, and he healed them. And the leading priests and the teachers of religious law saw these wonderful miracles, and they heard the children in the temple shouting, "Praise God for the Son of David." By the way, doesn't that sound like a fun church? Yeah, people are in there shouting, they're in there singing, they're having a great time. Broken people are being healed, and people whose lives have fallen apart, they're figuring out how to put the pieces together like what we just sang about. But the leaders were indignant. They asked Jesus, "Do you hear what these children are saying?" Jesus, this is not proper protocol in the temple. We enter this place solemnly and quietly and reverently, and we speak in hushed and whispered tones. And when it's all done, everyone files out quietly like they left a funeral. But look at these kids. You know what? In my mind, I imagined New Life. And kids running around the auditorium and kids running through the lobby, which they probably will after you give them a piece of cake today. All right? And they were shouting God's praises. Does that sound like a good church? Yeah, that's a great church. But notice the people asked Jesus a question, because Jesus was an outside-the-box kind of leader. Now, here's the big question. Why was Jesus so innovative? And I would like to suggest to you, the big idea is this. Jesus was so innovative because he understood the proper relationship that should exist between his mission, his message, and his methods. And we're going to dig into that for just a minute. So what was Jesus' mission? He said it to us with his own lips. He said, "I have come to seek and to save people who are lost." Jesus said, "I came for people that we sung about early, who felt like they were too dirty, who felt like they were too broken, who felt like they were disenfranchised by the local religious synagogues, who felt like they weren't religious enough, who felt kicked to the curb, who felt like they had done too many bad things, or that they were broken beyond repair." Jesus said, "I came for them. And I came to give them life to the full." Jesus left no doubt about that. He also left no doubt about this, that his mission was not up for negotiation, and it was not subject to change. No matter what you did to him. You could criticize him, you could make fun of him, you could try to discredit him, eventually you could kill him on a cross, but you would never change his mission. What was his message? His message was this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. In other words, this salvation, this forgiveness of sins, this fullness of life, there's only one place to get it, and that's through me. He said that with his own lips, and he left no doubt about it. It was not up for negotiation, and it was not subject to change, because the mission of Jesus never changed. The method of Jesus never changed. The message of Jesus never changed, but what about his methods? I love Jesus' methods. Whatever worked for his culture. While the religious leaders were all sitting in the synagogue saying, hey, you all get in here on the Sabbath and listen to this boring drivel that we're going to give you. And we're going to bore you to death, but it's your job because this is where you belong. Jesus was out teaching people standing in a boat. Jesus was sitting on a mountainside and the people were gathering. His synagogue looked so different from the synagogues that other people had. Why? Because it was whatever worked. And so Jesus adapted his methods to his culture. He spoke in parables, did all sorts of things. Now, one of the guys that Jesus trained was a guy who eventually started churches in Jewish cultures, in Gentile cultures, in Assyrian cultures, in Iranian cultures, in Greek cultures, in Italian cultures. They called it Roman back then. All these different cultures. And he wrote about what his method was. And I just want to read it to you because he learned this method from Jesus. He said, I try to find common ground with everyone. Common ground. It's why Jesus didn't wear a different kind of robe than everybody else in his culture wore. Even though he was a rabbi. All the other religious leaders did. You could tell them all anywhere they were. Jesus dressed just like everyone else. Common ground. It's why the synagogue that he invited people to was just common ground. It was on the shore of a lake. It was on the slope of a mountain. It was in somebody's house. It was in the courtyard of the temple. It's wherever people gathered. It was common ground. It's why Jesus taught people in parables. It was language that they were used to. He wasn't deeply theological. He didn't have to define his terms. It was common ground. It's what the Apostle Paul did in all of those cultures where he started churches. That, by the way, friends, is why our building doesn't look like a typical church building with stained glass windows and a steeple. This building is common ground that our community uses. It's why when I speak to you, when Angela or anybody else who comes here and speaks to you, it's why we don't use deeply theological terms that make us sound really intelligent and educated. Because I would rather that you just understood the amazing truths that Jesus brought. It's common ground. It's why I don't dress differently than anybody else. It's common ground. Yeah. He said, I do this with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news of Jesus. So at the end of this, here's how I want to tie this together. I want you to know that our mission is the same as Jesus' mission. We are a church unabashedly that says, if you think your life is too broken, if you think you're too messed up, if you think you've done too many bad things, if you have lost hope in life, if you're a wonderful person but you feel lost in this world, it doesn't make any difference who you are, it doesn't make any difference what your skin looks like, it doesn't make any difference what your culture is, it doesn't make any difference what your social status is, it doesn't make any difference what your gender is. Nothing about you makes any difference regardless of who you are. Jesus has a message that will change your life. He came for people like you and me so that we could have forgiveness of our sins, so that we could have the promise of living after this life in a beautiful place he would prepare for us, and so that we could experience fullness of life right here. Our mission is the same as Jesus, and guess what? It's not up for change. Everybody on board with that? Never change. Our message is actually the same as Jesus' message. And that is, there's only one place that you can get all that good stuff I just talked about. It's all found in Jesus, and outside of Jesus, you'll never find it. Because the message will never change. But here's one of the things that I love most about our church. It's one of our deepest held values. It has given shape to our church for 20 years. And as long as God allows our church to stand, it will continue to shape our church. And here it is. Our methods are as different from Jesus' methods as Sonoma and Marin counties are different from ancient Israel. That, by the way, is why I'm not standing in a boat to preach to you today. I'm pretty sure that might not work here. It's why we're not up on the side of a mountain today with a whole bunch of umbrellas. Right? Yeah. Whatever works in our culture. Now listen to this. Our methods have to continually change with the culture of our community. They have to. So here's what I want to tell you. Did you enjoy the songs we sang this morning? I thought they were absolutely outstanding. So here's my advice to you. Sing them now. I mean, get all the good you can get out of them, because 5 years from now, we will not be singing those songs. Got it? Because our culture will have moved on from that kind of music. And the last thing that I want to do is be part of a church that's caught in a time warp and singing songs that used to be popular somewhere, that somehow now I'm stuck with. Our church has to continually change as our culture changes. Now, I said at the beginning of this that Jesus was the most creative, innovative, and out-of-the-box kind of leader the world has ever known. And I just want to tell you this. He's also the most successful leader the world has ever known. Do you realize in just 3 years, he started the largest enterprise our world has ever known? I want to read you something. Every time I read it, it challenges me to my core. Every time I read it, there are places where I get overwhelmed. And it's one of my favorite descriptions of Jesus. I didn't write it. It's been around for years. It goes like this. He was born in an obscure village, the son of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. For 3 years, he became a wandering preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family or even owned a house. He didn't go to college. He never visited a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He did none of the things that we usually associate with greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. He was turned over to his enemies, and he went through a mockery of a trial. He was executed by the state, and while dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed tomb through the compassion of of a friend. Now, 20 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race, the leader of mankind's progress. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, all the parliaments that have ever sat, all the kings who have ever reigned, all put together, have not affected the life of man on this earth as much as this one solitary life. That's Jesus. That's our leader. Does that thrill you? That amazes me. So here's what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with this. As long as New Life stands, we will be innovative because the innovative DNA of Jesus is in our genes. He's our leader. That's the way he was, and that's the way we are. Are you on board with that? Yes, I'm on board with that too. I am so glad you came today. I'm going to get you out of here and next to that cake in about 5 minutes. So here's a couple things I want to say to you. If you will be kind enough to take your program, those of you who come here all the time, you already know this drill. For those of you who are brand new, on the inside of the program, you'll find this long, skinny card. On the front of it, by the way, this card is what enables us to be an innovative church. It's what enables us to partner with you, to actually come alongside you when you need it, when you want it. We want to be there. If you will trust us with your name, your email address, and a phone number, then when we need to get in touch with you, we will have a way to do that. When you ask for information, we'll have a way to get it to you. So if you will trust us with that, we won't spam you. We won't do any of that kind of stuff. On the back side, there are ways that you can ask for information. There are ways that you can ask us to pray about something that's going on in your life. If you read about something in the program that you'd like to sign up for, like Baby D or Baby Dedication, I know it was in there. We're going to do that next. Remember that thing where we talked about kids running around and so forth? Next Sunday, we're going to have this platform filled with parents and crying babies. Won't that be fun? Yes, indeed. So it'll be Baby Dedication time. So if you want to sign up for that or anything else, you can do that. Our guest services, people are going to come up to the front in just a minute, and they will be collecting these. In most churches receive an offering. Can I give you a different narrative about that? This morning, we're going to give you the opportunity to buy in. Not just to give an offering, not just to give a token to God. We're going to give you the opportunity to buy into what God is doing. And many of you do this Sunday after Sunday. And if you're brand new to New Life, please don't feel obligated to buy in. But if you come here every Sunday, I want to challenge you down to your core, buy in. Buy in. Because it's the way Jesus has chosen to fund his mission across the face of planet Earth. Let's stay engaged. Let's buy in. And let's be all in the kingdom and in the mission of Jesus. So, the worship band is going to play while the guest services people come. I'm going to lead us in a prayer before all that happens. I just want to say thank you. And Justin will dismiss you in just a moment. God, thank you for the people who are here. Thank you for what you're doing in all of our lives. Thank you for how you keep us fresh and innovative because, Jesus, that's how you are. Thank you that we get the honor and privilege of being as outside the box as you were. Would you touch our hearts with the same things that touch your heart? Would you give us eyes to see people the way that you see them? Would you give us hands to serve them as you serve them? Would you bless us as we walk through the coming year? Would you make us your people to your world? That's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.